So, welcome to the Oxford Clay Pottery podcast. I'm Catherine Tomlinson and I started an eco conscious pottery company called Oxford Clay. Now, at Oxford Clay, I don't just make pottery, I also make resources such as books and courses and information for other potters who want to be more eco-conscious in their pottery practice but maybe don't know where to start or can't find out the information they need. So that's what this podcast is all about. It's about sharing everything I've learned along my eco-conscious pottery journey with you, and I can't wait to get started. So let's go. Hello, welcome back to the Oxford Clay Pottery Podcast. I'm your host, Catherine Tomlinson. And in today's episode, I'm really excited to tell you about this book that I've just been reading. I got it out the library and it's so good. And it's really got me thinking about pottery. And so the book is Regenerative Fashion, a nature-based approach to fibres, livelihood and leadership by Safia Minney. So what I'll do first is just read out what Safia Minney means by regenerative fashion. So this is me reading out the part of the book. It's on page 11 and it's part of the introduction. And it's a really good kind of summary of what regenerative fashion is. So Minney says, the regenerative concept must also be applied to every part of the process. This begins with the soil and good farming practices and relationships with farmers through to product design, buying, production, financing, marketing, branding, distribution, and end of life. At every stage, a product can improve the lives of all those involved through paying living wages, supporting unionisation and gender and racial equality, promoting empowerment and opportunities for creativity and economic independence. Fashion can also identify better ways of caring for the land, restoring biodiversity, while reviving and promoting culture and livelihoods through craft. So, wow, that's like, that's incredibly good holistic definition. So, like this book is incredible. There's so much in there. It also showcases loads of different brands sort of doing things differently in the fashion industry, and how they're doing things differently. And there's so much interesting stuff there. Loads of new technologies, new fibers, loads of really interesting stuff about the way people are doing things differently. So yeah, I'm going to attempt to kind of try and distill this amazing, incredible, very informative book into a kind of podcast episode where we kind of compare it to um, the handmade pottery industry and can we learn any lessons? That's what I thought when I thought, how could this be applied to pottery? My first thought was, well, we can think of a pot really holistically. So not only, we as potters, like the ones actually making the pot, but it's thinking about like where the materials have come from, who has like mined those materials, the transport that's used to kind of get the materials to us, anything that's gone into that pot, any person that's had any kind of part in creating the materials to make that pot, that it's all part of the process. So Safia Minney has actually divided this book into three different parts, and in it she talks about how actually products and fashion, it's all kind of they're all interconnected, but the book is being divided in three parts just because it's kind of like easier to set out the information in that way. So that's what we'll do in this episode. I'm going to set out the information in the same way. Okay, so the first part of the book talks about nature and materials. So in regenerative fashion, what is being talked about here is like the materials that are actually used to make like clothing. So this is kind of the plants that are used for the fibers that are that create plants and animals, like could be wool as well, could be aloe, could be banana like fibers, could be bamboo fibers, could be cotton, is flax. There's so many different fibers that clothes can be made out of. So it's talking about how these are actually farmed and taken from the earth, grown how we look after the land and soil, that's and the animals, the biodiversity. So that's the kind of general concept of this section. So she has talked about four. So there's four different parts to this, which I wanted to talk through. Okay, so the first one is regenerative agriculture. So this is quite tricky because I don't think this can necessarily be applied to pottery. So unlike fibers that are grown for clothes, pottery, the raw materials for pottery are actually non-renewable, mostly. So clay, it's taken millions of years to form from rocks, and that is a non-renewable resource. So unlike fashion, we can't necessarily be kind of growing more clay, getting more clay, producing more clay in that sense. But we can apply some of another couple of things that she talks about. So in terms of renewable things that can go into pottery, I was thinking about plant ashes. Um, so this is something that we can do. We can grow our own plants to make into plant ash to use in pottery glazes. Or something I've been doing recently is I've been collecting leaves that plants have shed naturally. So in the UK in autumn, basically a lot of deciduous trees shed their leaves naturally. I've been collecting that just enough for me and leaving the rest, obviously, like for the plants and animals and to go back into the soil. And I've just been collecting some leaves to make into pottery glazes. So, if we think about that kind of thing as a renewable a material for pottery, that is potentially something that we could, focus our pottery on. So the glaze recipe I use actually is 40% plant ash. So that's, quite a significant amount of that glaze recipe I use can potentially be from a renewable resource. Um, so another part of this, the second part of this, is not using fossil fuels. So in the fashion industry, this means kind of not focusing on fossil fuels in terms of like the energy to make clothing, but it can also, and shoes as well, but it can be also not using like synthetic fertilizers derived from fossil fuels for the land, in which to grow the crops to make the clothes. So one way I thought about this was that, in pottery, we can kind of move towards not using fossil fuels in terms of perhaps the way we're firing our pottery. So we could maybe use renewable energy sources to fire our pottery. If we're using an electric kiln, and we live in a region of the world that does have renewable energy sources, we can use renewable energy to fire our pottery kiln. Um, and another thing I thought about in this section was that we could actually reduce the amount of energy we're using in general. So, say, like we live in an area where, some of the national grid is still, or lots of the national grid in terms of energy is still, derived from fossil fuels, then we can perhaps like just do something in our pottery practice to kind of reduce the amount of energy we're using in general. Say, for example, not using a heat gun to dry our work, we can just dry it more slowly, but like naturally, with no energy at all. Just dry our work, on a shelf or something, rather than dry it quickly with a heat gun, with an electric heat gun. So, okay, so that's number two. And then number three was she talks about natural fibers and localism. I thought this was so interesting, this concept. It's basically talking about how the fashion industry has become so global that it's asking people to grow things in their region of the world that are not kind of really natural things that they would be growing to make clothes out of, historically. So it's talking about, say, for example, using natural fibers that are from that region of the world and making fabrics out of those natural fibers. So what I thought about this was I thought we could really, as in pottery, was that we could prioritize using like locally sourced materials to cut down on the carbon emissions of like transporting those materials. So all over the world, there's different things, different clays that pottery can be made out of, different rocks. So each region of the world will have their own rocks, their own clays, and so as potters, we can really prioritize the materials that are found like most local to us to make our pottery out of. So I'm thinking, for the UK, for example, we've got loads of different ball clays that are from southwest England. There's high mod ball clay, high plas ball clay, another one called blue ball clay. And these are really amazing ball clays that we can use in our own pottery practice. If you're based in the UK, you can also use, if you're based in the UK, Groleg China clay rather than China clays mined, it further afield. And obviously, if you live in a different region outside the UK, then there'll be that, your own clays and rocks that are available to you. So it's really like looking at what the local geology is, and are any companies mining this material locally, and then prioritizing those in your work. So, and then the fourth thing she talks about is the role of design in the actual sustainability of a product. So I love this concept so much. And I really think it's quite hard to get your head around if you're a potter, because I think when I first started pottery, I have to admit, I didn't think about this at all. I was very led by the aesthetic, how I wanted something to look, and also my skill level, what I could make as well. That really led me to, practicing things that I was trying to like perfect and stuff. So this is basically turning that completely around and thinking about a product as um, like the actual environmental impact of it in the very beginning and designing that around it. So some people also call this design for the environment. And I wrote a blog post on this actually on the Oxford Clay website if you're interested to read more about it. But the basic concept is that so 80% in fashion industry, 80% of a garment's sustainability is determined at the design stage. So that's the basic concept. The basic concept is that you can determine the environmental impact of something in the way that you design it. So a few things I've thought about this in pottery in terms of applying design for the environment in pottery is that you could, for example, design pots that fit together really well in the kiln so that you're having to fire your kiln less. So if you're making like this, ginormous thing where you can only just fire it, in the kiln, and there's loads of space around it, loads of wasted space, and you're having to, fire your kiln more often just to make one thing, then that would be kind of using more electricity, more resources. And if you designed your pottery to really tessellate really well together, you're having to fire your kiln less often. Another thing you can do is design pottery so that it's you have less faults. You're having to throw away less wastage. So that could be, for example, what I've started to do is I've incorporated paper into my casting slip, and that prevents my slip castware from cracking. I'm losing less. I'm making sure I'm pouring more carefully in my slip cast mold, so I've got less clay, which is like being wasted, from that process. Um, it could be, for example, designing pottery around a specific way of making a glaze. So, you're sourcing glaze ingredients. This is another thing I do actually in my practice. Source glaze ingredients from regions where I know they have sort of very robust practices that are protecting workers. I know very simple supply chains, so I know exactly where that material's from. I know that what the workers mining it are protected, and the environment is protected, as far as it can be where things are mined. In terms of so the recipe I use basically prioritizes those ingredients over the aesthetic in terms of, it's a balance really. So it's like, the outcome is balanced with the environmental impact of the ingredients used. So another thing I thought about was, say, like the colors you're using for example, in your pottery. So prioritizing colors where that where that metal oxide is from. You could make your own metal oxides from recycled metal. So, or you can use, plant acid can color your pottery naturally as well. So that's what design for the environment is really. It's about designing something around its impact from the very beginning, its environmental and social impact from the very beginning. Right. Yeah, so that's part one of the book is nature and materials. So I'm interrupting this episode to tell you about a totally free guide I've made just for you on how to make your own pottery glaze recipe. So if you are a total beginner to glaze making and it's something you've wanted to maybe try, but you're not really sure where to start, this guide is specifically designed to take you through all the steps you need to know from start to finish, all the ingredients you need, all the equipment you need, and also how to fire your pottery glaze at the end. So, even if you're not new to glaze making and you just want a pottery glaze recipe that's very simple and specifically made with eco conscious ingredients, then this guide is also for you. So, you can get the guide in the show notes, there's a link, but also you can go on to the Oxford Clay website at www.oxfordclay.co.uk/resources for potters. Okay, let's go back to the episode. Um, And then parts 2 and 3, I thought there's less I can think of to apply to pottery here. So these two parts will be a bit quicker. But okay, so the second part of the book is about people and livelihoods. So she called it people, livelihoods, and crafts. And in the fashion industry, this means kind of really prioritizing kind of like maybe traditional ways of making fabrics, prioritizing people making things, paying people a living wage, eradicating modern slavery from the fashion industry, allow like prioritizing companies that are using, where people are able to unionize who are working for that company. Yeah, like I said, paying people properly for their labor. Um, in fact, there's a really, really good quote which I'll read to you. I love this quote so much. Oh gosh, it's so good. So this is the quote that the chapter starts with, and it's a quote by John Ruskin from the book Unto This Last, which was actually written in 1860, but it's so relevant today. This quote. I'm going to just read it out to you, and you can. Yeah, it's such a good quote. So, this is a quote from John Ruskin. Whenever we buy or try to buy cheap goods, remember that we are stealing somebody's labor, taking from them the proper reward of their work and putting it into our own pockets. You know well enough that the thing could not have been offered to you at that price unless distress of some kind had forced the producer to part with it. You have taken advantage of this distress. So in pottery, I thought what this could mean is prioritizing ingredients where the supply chains are simple and, like I was just saying, they are they are from regions. So they're simple in the sense that they're not mixed. They're not from different regions and mixed. So you don't know where that material's come from. So that's what I mean by a simple supply chain. It's mined somewhere, you know exactly where it's mined, you know how far it's had to come to get to you, and you can then use that material knowing about the regulation that's in place in that region and how people are protected. So for example, let's take for example cobalt. So cobalt in pottery is used to make blue, and Amnesty International have done loads of work on cobalt in terms of the problematic aspect of cobalt in the cobalt mining industry. Basically, some of the problems are that the artisanal miners are mining cobalt, and this is they're not safe. Basically, mining cobalt artisanally, so children are working in the artisanal mining sector. Cobalt is actually mixed before being sold. So it's impossible if you're using cobalt to know where that cobalt's come from. It could be artisanally mined, it could be commercially mined. You just don't know because the supply chains will be mixing that cobalt together. So, another problem with some commercial metal oxides is that people are actually cleared from the land to mine it because it's such a lucrative business. People will be forcibly moved off land if there's, certain things like, yeah, say like cobalt mining, like people want that to take place in that area. So, you can see Amnesty International, like I said, has so much research on this. It's really good. And they've got like free reports on their website. So you can read all about the cobalt mining industry. But that's what I was thinking in terms of pottery. I was thinking we could prioritize ingredients where we absolutely know that people haven't been exploited because we obviously, you know, it's impossible to say anything for absolute terms, but we know that there's legislation in certain areas in place designed to protect people, and in other areas, say like the legislation is not as robust, or it isn't enforced as much, or there's a large informal mining sector, then people aren't going to be protected as well in those regions, or in those mining sectors. So yeah, so that's what I thought. Prioritizing those ingredients in our clay and glaze making. And another thing which I thought, which is be quite a good thing to pop in here, was just in terms of pottery, is just that, are you exploiting yourself with your own pottery? Are you thinking of your own pottery as extractive? Are you taking the time to enjoy your pottery? Are you paying yourself enough for your pottery? Are you selling it a high enough price? Are you are you extracting your own labor, or are you really looking after your creativity, nourishing your creativity, looking after yourself, and not treating yourself as a pottery machine, pottery making machine? So that's one thing I thought in that section as well. Okay, so here we come on to the third section. In terms of the next section, it's actually new economy and leadership. So this really is all about companies taking responsibility and being transparent about their practices, and and taking positive action. So in pottery, I really thought about this, and I thought it's about kind of knowing really where our materials come from. It's about making those decisions, being transparent with the people maybe buying our pottery, if we sell pottery, about where the materials have come from, which regions of the world, really thinking about why we're making what we do with the ingredients we do, and just really finding out more about, our pottery ingredients and where they're from. And if you want to actually know more about particularly glaze making ingredients, and you don't really know where to start, I've got books on the Oxford Clay website. There's one specifically on glaze making ingredients, which I'll link below actually, on the Oxford Clay website, which tells you all about the different glaze making ingredients and where they're from and the environmental impact of them. If you're just confused and you would really like some more information about that, I've done loads of research on it, and it's all there for you in those books. So you can check those out as well. Um, yeah. Oh, yeah. So another thing she says in this section is circular economy business models. So that is like recycling. So it could be, say, like, for example, in pottery, recycling glass or recycling metals into your pottery, making your own metal oxides, recycling those into your pottery, finding glass around, which I've done in Oxford, and recycling that into your pottery is also a great way of like using those materials like in the circular economy back into your pottery. Yeah, wow. Okay, so I know this episode has been a lot. Like I said, this book is incredible, and Regenerative Fashion, a nature-based approach to fibres, livelihoods, and leadership. I definitely recommend you checking it out. Someone else has actually ordered this now from the library, so I'm under pressure to return it. So I like to return them before the due date, so that that person has more time to read it. They get that book sooner. So yeah, so I'll be returning this as soon as possible. And just a huge thank you for joining me on this episode. And can't wait to see you on the next episode. And yeah, until then, wishing you very, very happy potting, and I'll see you soon. Goodbye. Oh, yeah. So I hope you enjoyed that episode. And if you're interested to learn more about eco conscious pottery, or making your pottery more eco conscious and sustainable, there's so much for you on the Oxford Clay website, which is www.oxfordclay.co.uk. I can't wait to see you there.